What would you do in this situation? Imagine you just got off an international flight and you're in a Subway restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You feel terribly sick. In fact, you have reason to believe that your condition could be fatal if you don't get medical help quickly. Do you call 911? That's the situation Luke was in on a January day back in 2016. But he was hesitant to call for help because he knew why he was sick. That terrible feeling he had in his stomach was from a little rubber balloon that had unexpectedly broken. And he was feeling the effects of some very high-quality cocaine saturating his internal organs. This is a flashback episode. The flashback episodes always come in between the regular new episodes, so we always have a new story every other Friday. Luke originally told this story in 2018 here on the podcast. So after we hear what happened, I have a little update conversation from when I connected with Luke again just recently. You'd never guess what he's doing today. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a girl hanging by her broken leg from the telephone wire.
And I called 911 and I said, I found a baby.
I turned around. I see a gun pointed at me close enough I could touch it.
She would hold our heads on the water all the time.
He levels the gun, pulls the trigger, and I go down.
Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't want to leave us.
My hair catches on fire.
I swear to God, this image is burned in my head for the rest of my life.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? I'm just really curious about this.
Sure.
What does it feel like when a balloon of cocaine just bursts or breaks in your stomach?
See, that's a hard question to answer because first, you're not even entirely sure why it happened or what the problem is. You're just feeling incredibly sick. Whenever I first started to feel it, I just felt my side start to shake violently. And I mean, I had done enough research at the time to recognize that there was the possibility that the packages could get jammed up within your intestines and then eventually free up. And that could be a possible problem. And that by freaking out immediately, you could end up turning yourself in when it was completely unnecessary. And so I chilled out for a little bit, knowing something was wrong. But whenever the dry heaving started to get violent enough, I recognized that there was probably a serious problem involved. And then maybe 15 minutes later, I decided that I needed to call in the hospital because it was just getting to be too strong for me.
Not something that was going to go away on its own.
No, definitely not. I thought about it, and interestingly enough, I went over to a free medical clinic while I was feeling the effects of the cocaine, and I asked them, and I was sort of in a panic mode, but I was just I really didn't want to call the hospital, and I was essentially like, hey, is there anything you guys can do to help me? And I would have gone so far to even ask if they could have done the surgery on me there without having to go to the hospital. But
wow.
The lady there was she was freaked out by the whole scenario, and I was freaked out, and she was probably freaked out because I was freaked out. And so
you told her that it was cocaine you told her what happened?
I did.
Okay.
I told her that I had swallowed cocaine packages and one of them had burst inside of me and I needed it cut out. And I think she was just some medical person standing there at the front. She was like a secretary, and she's like, we can't do that.
Not the kind of question they get every day.
No, definitely not. To this day, she probably has no idea what happened to me.
Man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, before we get into all of that and all the details on that, give us a little bit of background on what your thought process was or why you decided to go through and try to make this happen.
All right. I mean, I guess the idea that everyone is able to grasp onto the most is the fact that I did it because I was in massive student loan debt. I went into school under the impression that this is the necessary steps coming out of high school and moved myself into college to essentially earn something that would eventually be an investment that would pay itself off later. So I got into school and I got a degree in petroleum engineering, which was a fantastic degree at the time. And as I was graduating my senior year, I ended up running into a market that went downturn at that particular point in time, right around 2014, 2015. And I was left with 6 figures of debt and no good way to pay them off because they weren't hiring entry level engineers because there was just no profit to be made in oil at that particular point in time. And so being left at a point where I felt like I was sort of trapped by my own financial situation, I turned to a fast way that I did not see, especially at that point in time, as having any like immoral implications. And so I took a mode in which I knew that based on the principles of high risk, high reward, I could pull off fairly quickly and get my student loans paid off. To go into like a deeper version, I mean, maybe if you're interested in that kind of thing, I could give you sort of a deeper idea as to why I got into it. But I think the one that people understand the best is the fact that I just had student loans and I felt very trapped by them.
So you felt like you really didn't have any other option.
Yeah, definitely. It's you work, and even at best, you're working and making on a normal job $800 a week, at least in my particular scenario. And my student loans are $1,200 a month that they're taking out of everything. To think that I would be able to move out of my parents, get my own place, and start like living off of that, it just didn't make any sense. I mean, it's going to take me 10, 15 years to pay off my student loans, and just the way that I'd been living up to that point and being sort of fearful of my own mortality and running out of time, I couldn't bear the idea of sitting around for that long.
Running out of time. And what was your age at that time?
I was 23. I know, and that's 23. The crazy idea. That's the one that people don't understand quite so well.
So you were 23 years old and you're thinking, man, I don't have much time left. I've got to do something.
I still do to some degree. I don't know why. I can't get rid of that idea.
Well, I think that's a better way to look at it than a lot of people say, oh man, I've got my whole life. There's stuff I want to do, but I've got time. I'll do that later.
Right.
But you're kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah. You get to the end of your 80 years and you look back and you say, what happened? Where did it all go?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. To deal with that idea at the end of life, it's just not a possibility for me to do.
So you came up with the idea that to go into another country and get some drugs, cocaine specifically, bring it back in, sell it, and make it pay off. Even that, I think you were planning on this one to pay off make like $50,000, right?
Right.
So that even that wouldn't have paid off the whole debt.
No,
just a big chunk of it.
Correct. But that would have put me in a really good spot as far as interest goes, because when obviously you have a large amount, then the interest accrues very quickly. And so that would have at least taken like a chunk out of it to where I felt like it was bearable. Who knows? I may have eventually, even at that point, been like, you know what, one more go and I'm home free. But depends how it would have went. Clearly it went poorly. So
right. Yeah, it didn't turn out as you expected. Right.
Yeah.
How did you figure out how you were going to do this? I mean, do you have friends that are drug dealers or you go by what you saw on television, or how did you research this?
I mean, well, I've used drugs in the past because I'm a very experimental person. I think that life is worth understanding the fringes, and so I was willing to try certain drugs. And so I knew people and I knew drugs very well, but I didn't use very frequently because I also recognized the value in maintaining your mind. And so I basically did all the research myself. I was not connected with any big time dealers nor the cartel or anything like that. I just thought, I recognized that I had gotten away with a lot in my past, and I maybe was a little bit arrogant with my own intelligence. And so I thought, hey, if other people can do it, I can do it. And so I put in the planning and did the research to try and figure out the safest method of trying to transport it all in one big go. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, laziness, procrastination, I don't know what it was, but at the very end it beat me. I guess my own confidence in myself ended up being my downfall, because I just thought there was no way it would fail.
Right. And, in thinking or hearing this, I can't help but think I've seen some of the episodes of this show called Locked Up Abroad. Mm-hmm. And, all of those people get caught at the airport. I mean,
I know.
You didn't think that was a possibility then, right? Or it was a minimal risk that you were willing to take?
It was the research that I did, and that's actually the reason that I chose the method that I did. There's plenty of ways that you could try and smuggle it in with just your material items, trying to bring it through the airport. But that's why I went internal, is that those scanning devices do not pick up in that way. And I did a lot of research on the scanning devices. I obviously wanted to avoid dogs and them being able to smell. And so,
can the dog smell even if it's internal?
No, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to go internally as well.
Okay.
But I mean, a lot of people ask why didn't I go up the other way, and it just I don't know. I guess it wasn't really my style, and so I figured that this was going to be the way as well. That it would allow me the biggest gap of time between I can enter them in my body and that they would need to exit, and that would give me plenty of time on the flight, and I wouldn't need to. I don't know. It just wouldn't be as much pressure.
Right. Okay. All right. So how did you start this process, or how did you plan it and do it?
Well, I mean, I guess I first got the idea. I was traveling around in Peru and I recognized how inexpensive it was down there. For example, like you can't get anything in the north that's very pure at all. And so you're down in Peru, and even the most impure stuff up in Ohio or anything north of there is going to be like, it's cut all the way entirely down, and it still costs $100 a gram, and you could get it for $10 a gram in Peru. So at that point, it started got my mind rolling and recognized the investment is a massive payoff. And so from there, I just always entertained that idea in my mind, and it just slowly turned into the point where once I started paying all my student loans, it just got it started to build and grow, and eventually became to a point where I felt like I needed to do it.
Right. And you decided on what country? Was it Panama?
Well, I actually was originally thinking about Colombia, but I chose not to go to Colombia because, one, I didn't feel like the traveling was as good there. I love traveling. And two, it was a place in which a lot of people, the customs would be stricter coming from Colombia, and they are experienced with having drugs come in from that particular country. And so I figured I'd go to the one right next to it that's a little bit less regulated, but would allow me to travel through a bunch of countries on the way down, which was Panama.
And so you take us through the process. You show up in Panama, and what do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I would manage as a white kid to come down there with no connections and try and pull off something like this. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it throughout my travels. I ended up going from Mexico all the way down to Panama, through Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and then Panama. And at that time, I was trying to get a feel for the people there and how I would connect with them to be able to get their trust to be able to do it. How I ended up doing it was I essentially, without getting too much details, got from him, or I picked up from him, the guy that I met at a music festival in Panama, in very, very small increments, and never really gave him a final amount. That way he would not rob me, knowing, okay, he's wanting to get 300 grams. Let's just take it all from him one fell swoop. And instead would get it started small and got larger and larger and larger until the point where I had the amount that I needed, and then just sort of disappeared. Never knew his name, never knew his contact, for the reason that I wanted to protect myself in him.
Okay. And over what period of time did you accumulate the full amount?
It was about 6 days. It was, I think we had 6 or 7 days there. And that was part of it as well, is I wanted to, maybe in the first day or two, we went to the music festival and I met the guy. And then the subsequent times, I would basically give him a name a location in the city that was public. I started out with a color of shirt for him to wear so that I could recognize him. And then, like I said, the date, the time, and the amount that I needed. And I told him that I was always going to test it, and I was always going to weigh it. And every single time I'd meet up with him and I'd give him a new name, or a new place, location, and same thing, I guess, but place, time, and date. And we'd redo the entire thing over again throughout the course of those 6 days or whatever it was.
So he was probably pretty happy to have you as a regular customer that week.
For sure, because I was showing up with American cash consistently. Mm-hmm. He didn't exactly want to lose that either. He robs me one time, and who knows how much he would have lost out on.
Right, because he didn't know when it was going to end, or if it was going to end.
Of course.
So how much money did you spend overall in that 6 days on cocaine?
It ended up being around $2,000. It equated to $7 a gram. So
Okay.
I ended up total with 285 grams. It wasn't quite 300 grams. It was 285, which is that's right around 10 ounces. And at that point in time, I knew that it was so cheap. I had worked enough and I had money. And so I paid him then, knowing that if I could just get it back to the States, that the investment would be far worth it.
Right.
So,
did you buy a little package of balloons, or what did you put it in?
yeah, that was actually one of the key factors in the downfall of the whole thing. Is I put some thought into packaging it correctly, but the thing is, online, especially when I had done my research previously, there just wasn't enough information on how to do it correctly, because obviously it's not something that people ever do. And so I chose a method in which I thought it was close enough, but was just kind of hoping for the best. And I put them in the fingers of a latex glove and would push the cocaine down in and tack it as tight as I could, tie it off, take a dab of super glue and put a dab on the end to hold the knot shut. And then I'd take it and I'd dip it in hot glue and then cool it off, try and make sure that there wasn't any like frays on the hot glue that could poke holes in other bags. And then from there, I did that and I dropped it in a mock acidic solution of muriatic acid, which your stomach is basically, it's hydrochloric acid, but I tripled the pH level of it in order to basically create something that I knew the stomach acid wouldn't be able to eat away. And I started with not cocaine. I started with powdered sugar, and then I left them in there for 3 days while I was collecting the cocaine to try and make sure that whenever I pulled them out, there wasn't like any holes or anything eating through it. And at that point in time, there wasn't. And so I knew I could push the limit from there and that I'd be okay.
So how many bags did you have to create?
I created 48 of them.
48.
I basically just tried to, and that was the weird thing as well, is that at the time I wasn't sure how big of something I could swallow. And so I was, especially because I didn't know how many layers I was going to put on it. And so I tried to basically make something the size of what I believed I could swallow if I had to. And I basically would just use as many as I needed to make that happen. And then I would adjust my timing from there. And it ended up that for that 285 grams, I needed 48 packages, which ends up being around $6 or 6 grams a package.
Okay.
Like obviously some were bigger, some were smaller.
And so we can picture this.
Yeah.
One of these little bags was the size of what? Like
it was
in comparison with an object that we would know about.
Maybe if you cut your thumb right at the knuckle, the tail end of it at its thickest part, and basically like a cylinder around that size.
Okay. That's still a pretty good sized thing to swallow.
Oh yeah, it's much bigger than any horse pill you've ever seen, and it was hard to get them down. It was real hard.
Did you drink a lot of water? Or?
I did. I had to. I originally tried some different methods. I tried to oil it up and swallow it, but I couldn't get the oil wouldn't allow like my I guess my esophagus to grasp onto it, and they keep popping up, and that was making me gag. And so I just took water, and I'm like, whatever, I'll fill my stomach with as many as I can get. And we were late for our flight at this point, and so I'm like rushing to put all 48 of these things down, which was not the proper way to do it. But I'm just taking a water bottle and essentially shoving it and forcing it down. It hurt bad right when it'd get down into the entryway to your stomach, because it felt like it narrowed some. And looking back at some of the anatomy of the human digestive system, it actually does decrease in size right there. And so it was especially painful right before they'd enter into the stomach.
Well, it's the same idea as just eating food too much too fast, right?
Yep,
exactly. It gets crowded down there.
Yeah, it does.
So that was so the reason you had to do it so quickly was because you were running late for your flight,
right?
And did it occur to you maybe take the next flight or go the next day? Or
it did, but once you get that first one in you, like, you're going. But I mean, I could have taken the next flight and done all that kind of stuff, but it would have just delayed the entire process. And I thought that I would still have had enough time in my flight. I mean, I knew I was really pushing it, but I don't know. Again, it kind of boiled down to the fact that I really hadn't gotten caught for anything in my past,
Right.
or nothing serious anyways. And I was very confident in my ability to pull things off last minute to try and wing it and still survive all right.
Do you, just as an aside, do you still have that same level of confidence now in your abilities or skills or anything?
I don't know. It's like I think it's still yes, it's still very high.
Mhm.
My parents oftentimes joke that they somehow made us kids so confident because it kind of exists within my siblings as well. But I tend to be the one who pushes things further than anybody else.
No, really?
Yeah, right. But yeah, I look back and I recognize that I'm definitely mortal, and I recognize that I can't pull everything off, but I still have a lot of confidence. Obviously, I'm transferring that confidence into legal ways, but I have not become a timid individual, I guess I'll say, from this experience.
Okay. So you got on the plane, okay, no problems. You landed. Where did you land in the U.S.?
I landed into Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
And once I got out, I was kind of hoping that I'd just get to a hotel right away, but the taxi driver was taking me all over the place, and I wasn't able to get there as quickly as I wanted to. And then when I got there, like, it was going to be an expensive hotel, but I had really no other option.
Right. And how long before you would expected the bags to start exiting?
I'm going to start exiting in the next like 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours, because my flight, I believe, by the time it was all said and done, by the time they entered and it was gone, it was like in between 4 and 5 hours. And generally, from what I'd read, I still believe is correct, it takes about 8 hours for things to enter and then start to exit through your digestive system.
Okay.
And so I kind of planned it out for that reason. And whenever I got there, it didn't take long before I got to the hotel that one of them actually burst in my stomach. So there was still some in my stomach, but there was definitely some down in my intestines from the doctors that had to cut them out of my intestinal system.
Right. Okay. So I thought I read somewhere that you were in a Subway restaurant when this happened.
No, and that's like a common confusion. I was by a Subway, and
Okay.
it was by like, oh wait, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was by a Subway restaurant when all of it went down. And I'm sorry, I think the confusion is generally people think that I was in a Subway, like in a Subway underground.
Oh, no. I knew it was a restaurant, but I thought you were in the restaurant.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I actually did go into the restaurant temporarily. Whenever I first started to dry heave, I knew I needed to get out of the hotel. I was standing there in the lobby, and it was bad. And the hotel clerk, receptionist, is like, "Do you need me to call the hospital?" Because it was really bad. I couldn't even talk to her. And I'm like, no. And I basically just rushed out. I went over to the Subway across the street because I was afraid that these packages, being the size that they were, would end up in my esophagus and start choking me. And being by myself, it was not a good scenario. And so I went into the Subway, managed to maintain myself enough to buy a couple giant bottles of water, and then went outside into the parking lot and sat down because I was just feeling so terrible. At that point in time is like right when I started to, like, the effects of the cocaine started to come on. And if you felt that at all, it's like a rush to start off with, but it was simultaneously combined with the mental degradation and like the depression that I immediately went into, knowing what the results of that speed were. And so it's like you're coming up physically, but you're coming down mentally so quickly at the same time that it's just a very, very bad feeling. Your brain's going 100 miles an hour, and you don't know what option to take just yet, knowing that the more time that you wait, the more risky it is that your life's going to end, but not wanting to turn yourself in so quickly that it, like, you mess it up, that it was just like, for whatever reason, a placebo, or it was, you could have outlasted it. Like, it was just a small leak or whatever it was. And so I just had a balancing point in which I waited, but tried not to wait too long.
So what's the last thing you remember? Do you remember going to the hospital?
Yeah, I called for an ambulance, and they asked me, "Why do you need an ambulance?" I was like, "I just need one, please. Can you come here?" And of course the cops show up. They don't know what's going on. And I explain it to them, and they're out there trying to question me, sitting on the sidewalk with my backpack. and not letting me get into the ambulance yet. I assumed that they thought that I was just a kid who was overdosing on cocaine and that they didn't recognize the seriousness of my situation like I did. And so I kept trying to get into this ambulance, and they kept trying to just have me like explain things a little further, because I was maintaining myself just in such a way that I knew I needed to get to the hospital to be able to get the surgeons some of this information, or the nurses and the doctors, or they weren't going to be able to save me probably. And so I maintained my composure, and I think that's part of the reason why they didn't want me to go right away. But eventually I just was adamant. I said, I got to go. I got to get in the hospital. And I climbed up into the ambulance, and they're like, okay. And once I got into the hospital, I had texted actually some of the people that were very close to me and kind of explained what happened. And interestingly enough, later on in the hospital, I basically had told them not to tell my parents because they were in India at the time, and I was feeling so terrible about that. I don't know, I somehow thought I could still get myself out of it. And so they put me under an alias in the hospital, which made it extremely difficult for my parents to find me later on.
I bet.
And, yeah, but the last thing, I guess, to circle back, the last thing I remember was after I got in the hospital and the detective came and he questioned me and asked me why I did it, and I explained why I did it. After that whole thing went down and I puked some of the packages out, it got too strong for me because I felt like I was going insane. And so I turned to the doctors and the nurses and the detective, and I was just like, please don't let me die. And that's the last thing I remember.
So they knew at that point that you had swallowed all this cocaine? And
yes.
So at that point you'd given up, saying, okay, whatever happens, at least I don't want to die. Yes,
that's essentially what it boiled down to. It's you try and defend yourself and you die, or you open up like a book and you survive. Right. And I think because I was able to open up and sort of let it all go at that point in time, that's how they were able to save me.
And did you pass out on your own at that point, or did they put you under some kind of anesthesia, or what happened then?
I think from the reports, I believe I passed out on my own. I don't think that they recognized it was as critical as it was. And from the medical reports that I did read, it's eventually I passed out from the cocaine.
Okay.
And that's when they recognized like things were getting really bad in my system. And then they eventually like were regulating it all and went into surgery eventually.
Mm-hmm. While you were passed out, they went in and surgically removed all of this cocaine.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, the balloons they could take out easily because they could spot them and remove them. But what about the one that was already broken? I mean, that would already be in your system, in your bloodstream, right?
Right. From what I saw from the medical reports, I puked out 32 of the packages, so that left another 16.
That's quite a few.
Yeah, it was. And I was awake for that. They were all coming out, and the detective was there, and he did a cocaine analysis right on the packages that were in the bucket, the blue bucket that I puked it all into.
He must have loved his job that day.
Oh yeah, for real. But I think he from his police report, it was kind of an interesting one, because at some point he was like, okay, I'm finished up. I can go now. And he started to walk out, and I asked him if he'd stay with me because the nurses and the doctors weren't sitting in there at that point in time, and I didn't want to be left alone. And so he did. He came and he sat down next to me, and we continued to talk until more people came in the room, because I just was so inside my own head at that point in time. I couldn't bear to be alone. And so he actually stayed with me, and he talked it out with me. So I think it was definitely a weird day for him.
I'll bet. Yeah. But a nice guy.
Yeah, very. I'm thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. How long were you out?
It ended up being a total of like 10 days. So I obviously I was in an induced coma, and they kept me under in that way because they weren't sure that I was going to be able to like wake up all right, and that like my body needed to heal itself and from the surgery and everything. And so when I did wake up, my parents were there, and I still had the tube down my throat, the intubation tube, and my hands were cupped around these aluminum something or others, but basically it kept me from hitting anything or hurting myself, because previously apparently they tried to wake me up and onto a different medication, and I woke up and turned pretty violent. And so when I woke up, I was okay. It was just a lot to deal with. It was my parents standing over top of me crying, and it me not entirely sure why I was in there. I knew why I was in there, but it was like mixed in with all these other dream states that I had while I was in the coma. And so the coming out of that process was one of the wildest things I've ever experienced. There's a mental journey by far.
Tell us about that. So you were in a coma for 10 days, but
yeah.
Did you still have any sense of anything that was going on? Could you hear people or anything?
Yeah, actually I could hear people, but it wasn't like it was mixed into your dreams as if like, and I say dreams, but they were very lucid. Like I remember them even to this day as if they were like memories. But yes, I do remember hearing my parents at one point in time. It was mixed in with a time in which I thought that I was in like a sort of purgatory. I'm not a religious person, but it felt as if like that's what it was. And then I was walking around the hospital and there was just a bunch of other people that were dead as well. Those entire states I could talk about for hours, but they are, again, it'd be sort of like telling somebody your dream. They're very real to you and they induce emotion to you, but to others, they just seem like sort of random information,
right?
Just like events happening all over the place. And a lot of them were really, really good, like almost like emotionally inducing in the way that you'd see enlightenment to be. As if you understood everything about the universe. And then others were absolutely horrific in which you knew something was terrible or you felt like you were insane and you couldn't get rid of it.
If you had the opportunity now under controlled conditions to be put into an induced coma again for a period of time, a few days or longer, would you do that? Just to experience it again?
Again, I'm a very experimental person, and so probably, but I do believe that I'd handle it far better. It was obviously a brand new event for me at the time, and it wasn't a chosen one. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that if it happened again, that I would have similar memories and states like I did to start off, like that I did the first time, because obviously I was in there for 10 days. Who knows if these individual memory states were like dreams that were only like 15 minutes long, but felt like an eternity within the coma.
Right.
So I wouldn't be expecting anything like what I experienced, to be honest. But,
okay. Were you aware of how much time had passed when you came out of it? Or what did you think?
No.
How long did you think you had been under?
There was once I was out of it, again, my sober or my reality was sort of mixed with my previous mental like fabrication. And so I would have times in which I really knew what was going on, especially when I was grounded to somebody like my parent and I was talking to them about the situation. And then when they left me to go, they didn't recognize that I was so kind of mentally unstable. And so when they left me to go back to the hotel for the night to let me sleep, my mind just it grasped onto everything on its own and it began to create its own reality again. And at that point in time, I thought I was under for a month, or that I had been homeless for over a year. And because that was actually one of the memories that I had while I was under the coma. I thought that like, that's why I was in the hospital, that I was this homeless guy and I had lost my parents a long time ago and that police found me and brought me there. So it was a very confusing time for me.
Wow.
So sometimes, yes, I did remember why and how long I was in there, and sometimes no.
Okay. So when you came out of the coma, how much longer did you remain in the hospital?
It was, I think I spent around 3 days in the ICU. Still, that was when everything was like most intense for me and I was super paranoid and extremely anxious. But I had my dad there who, after that first night and seeing how bad it was for me, stayed with me the duration of the time throughout the night. And then I got moved to another room for about 5 days. And I was gaining my mind back at that point in time. I couldn't walk when I was in the ICU. And so I was regaining my strength and wanting more than anything to, again, sort of not be locked up and wanting to be free. And during that point in time, the 10 days in the coma and then the other 6, I believe it ended up being total outside of it, I had lost 40 pounds. I went from 175 pounds down to 135 pounds and it was skin and bones essentially.
Wow.
And so walking out, it was a weird time for me.
Yeah. It sounds like your parents were, I'm sure they weren't happy, and I'm sure they were disappointed, but they sound like they handled it pretty well. Do you think?
Yeah, incredibly well. And I mean, they've sort of been a rational source throughout my entire life. They've been fantastic parents. I don't think I could have asked for better ones. And they recognize that you can't influence from a distance, and to turn on me whenever I was when I was struggling most, it would have been the fastest way out of my life. And so they were just there to support me the whole time. And of course, I recognize that they were extremely disappointed. I feel like me as an individual hurt worse to recognize the disappointment and pain in somebody else than it does for me to get yelled at by them.
Right.
And so, yeah, I believe they handled it fantastically.
So when you left the hospital, this was a hospital in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It was, Memorial Regional.
And where did you go from there?
From there, I left, and it was in February, right when I got out, early February. And so it was cold in Florida, and I was freezing the entire ride home, but I flew home and it was even colder in Ohio. I went home and I had to stay bundled up in layers and layers of hoodies, and I had to take about 5 baths a day, and just to stay warm, because I had lacked so much fat and I lost so much muscle in my body. I also wasn't capable of eating very much because of the surgery they'd done on my stomach, and I was just get full off of everything. So it was hard to regain weight back, but it came.
So you went back to Ohio, which is where that's where your home is.
Right.
The next chapter is the legal aspect of this.
Yes.
Being charged. What were you actually charged with?
Well, in between the hospital aspect and the legal aspect came with a lot of emotion, a lot of retrying to gain my mental state and physical state. And that took me about a month before I tried to worry about anything legal. And once I got to the point where I could handle myself physically and mentally, and I was in a state to even communicate with my legal advisor, then I moved on to the legal aspect of it. And that ended up being a 6-month process around, I don't know, some of these numbers start to get confusing when you talk about them so much, the durations of time, and it's just been a little while. But I think it was around 6 months in which I was out on bond because my parents bonded me out, and working with my legal advisor, and end up taking a plea deal to where I went in. And I did get charged with cocaine trafficking between 28 and 200 grams.
Okay. And did they charge you with that in Florida or Ohio?
They charged me with it in Florida.
Okay.
And originally, obviously, I brought more cocaine in than the 200 grams, but with the way that everything worked out with my legal advisor and the prosecutors and how they wanted the evidence to be, or how they wanted to charge me, they put me right below it.
So,
because if I'd have been above the 200 gram, then I'd have been serving a 7-year minimum mandatory sentence.
Wow. So by taking a plea deal, what did you agree to?
I essentially agreed to 21 months imprisonment, and then 5 years, followed by 5 years of probation with early termination. And they minimized my probation costs, as they recognized a lot of the reason why I was in there in the first place was because I was trying to pay off student loans. And so I'm in Ohio. I got an interstate compact from Florida after serving my time in Florida. And I've been home since, just basically serving out my probation here.
Okay. Yeah. I guess that's because you were charged in Florida. You had to do your time in Florida.
Exactly.
Okay. And where was it in Florida? What prison?
I actually got moved around to a lot of different prisons. I started in the South Florida Reception Center, which is down in Miami. I went to a work release center in St. Pete. I went to 2 prisons in Polk County, one the work prison, one the regular prison. Stopped through several different prisons, one being Swanee, one being Tomoka, just all over the place.
You did the whole Florida prison tour, huh?
Yeah, right.
Why did they move you around so much? Why not keep you just in one place?
Well, they tried to, and the majority of my time was spent between a rehab facility in Tomoka, a work release center in St. Petersburg, Florida, and the reception center down in Miami. But all the other prisons, as you get transferred to go to different places along the path, you might have to spend a week or I mean, sometimes more, but they try and get you out of there fairly soon. But sometimes you have to hunker down for a week in whatever prison that you're kind of passing through.
Right. Okay. And
which obviously brings in its own like dangers, because the most dangerous time is whenever you're first being introduced to a new population. But
so that's what I want to talk about. First of all, how did you, knowing that you were going into prison for an extended period of time, how do you prepare for that, mentally or physically?
You do as much research as you can.
Obviously, I knew you would be doing research because that's what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It made things 10 times worse because you deal with all these sources on the internet that make it into this terrible thing. Any documentary you watch on it, you're completely sure you're going to go in there and you're going to get screwed up in some way. And so I was battling with the information, or the information that I was reading was battling against my experiences from my past, recognizing that everyone dramatizes this world, and the things that I had been through in the past that people had always deemed to be harmful to you were always never as bad as what they were originally like portrayed to be. And so I was constantly like trying to deal with my past history, knowing that I could handle any situation going or with all the information that I was getting that said that this is going to be the worst place you could possibly imagine.
Can you describe your first day in prison? What was that like?
My first day in prison, well, actually, first you check into the jail. So you get taken from the courtroom and you move down into the county jail. And I spent 4 days in there. And of course, you're getting a bunch of information from all sorts of crazy sources as to what prison is going to be like. Usually the guys in jail hadn't been to prison. They call it going up the road, which means that you're going to be doing anything. Anyone who has a longer than a 1-year sentence goes to prison. Anyone who has less than a 1-year sentence stays in the jail. And of course, right when I walk in, I still have like longer hair. I walk in, and of course, like somebody makes a kissy face at me. Like the very first person I see will being entered into the cell. I was like, great. But those first couple of days, I just met a guy who had a lot of books, and I started reading. My first day in prison was I expected to be like it. I guess it gave me the impression that it was going to be very violent, because I come in there and I start getting screamed at by the guards. We're made strip down immediately, and all our stuff is taken from us. We're giving a pair of like blue clothes, and we're going through like an orientation. It's a very depressing time because everybody's going in there for a long time, but you're all getting checked in together, not knowing what's going to happen to you. The next couple of weeks, I feel like were even harder for me because I was placed in a cell in which I didn't have a roommate for the largest amount of time, and I was locked down for a good portion of every single day. And coming from the outside, where you have all this stimulation from your phone or like your friends or whatever it is, you move into a place where there's nothing. And at least for those first 3 or 4 days, it drives you nuts to some extent. You're like, this can't be what it's going to be like for the next year or so. Like I can't do it. But eventually come like day 4 or a little further, your brain starts to readapt itself to where you don't need all the stimulation anymore. And you start to, instead of gaining it from external sources, start to delve internally, and you use your own imagination to kind of entertain yourself. And eventually I got moved into a place after about 3 weeks of that, got moved into a place where I could start working, and I had books, and everything got much easier from that point. But the first like little bit of time where you're dealing with that understimulation was by far the hardest.
Okay. So you would spend most of your time, did you get to choose your job in prison?
No, we had to take a sort of an aptitude test. It was an intelligence test, an aptitude test, and an educational test. And based on my scores, they actually took me to the warden. They're like, we want him to be a law clerk. He's like, how much experience does he have? And my classification officer, who was the head of classification, was like, oh, well, he doesn't have anything, but these are his scores. And he's like, okay, let's have him. So I got placed pretty much in the best job right from the get-go, because of obviously my education. But I was able to go in there and I started learning law. And then they realized that I was going to be moving on to a different facility sooner than it'd take for me to get my actual certification. And they stuck me as a librarian for a while. So you don't really get to choose your job. They place you based on need for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah.
I'm picturing you as the Andy Dufresne going in, you're the smart guy, and within a few days, you're the warden's personal assistant or something,
It's not, I mean, I guess thinking back on it, I never really compared it to that, but there wasn't I can see that there's definitely an analogy there.
Mm-hmm.
I got along with all the guards well is mainly because I just didn't mess with them. I minded my own business. I always tried to help out all the guys. It seemed like I ended up being sort of like the prison's personal psychologist, as guys would sort of gravitate into my room and just sit there and want to talk for hours. And being a natural extrovert, I thought that I would always be able to do that with a smile on my face. But eventually you just get to the point where it's almost like they're sucking the energy out of you. And it didn't take long for me to sort of become somewhat introverted while I was in there.
Were you ever in fear for your own safety?
No. There was times where I was uneasy, don't get me wrong, where you are on edge and you're not entirely sure who the people that you're surrounded with are and what their intentions might be. But I guess I could go back. I think a lot of guys are very fearful in there, but obviously fear isn't something that necessarily takes as big a hold in my life, I think, as it does most people. I mean, obviously I wouldn't have tried to swallow a bunch of cocaine packets if I was a very fearful person, but no, I don't think there was. But I think that for the normal individual, that there probably would be times for sure that they would be fearful.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, what you hear is that if you're going to go into prison, you want to join forces or join a gang or something so that, if somebody tries to mess with you, you've got people to protect.
That's one of the things that I heard I was going to have to do.
Uh-huh.
And I don't like that kind of ideology because it pairs, first off, it's admitting to your own weakness that you need strength in somebody else. And then it's also pitting yourself against a different race or a different educational background or whatever it is. And that to me felt like worth me getting beat up over. Like I would rather get hurt in there not pairing up than take that stance and live with it for the rest of my life, because that's just not me.
Right, because most of the gangs are racially grouped, right?
Yes, yes, very much so. And the gangs do exist in there, and I think everything depends on whatever prison you're in. But in every prison that I was in, and as a general consensus, I'd say for the state of Florida at least, joining a prison would be a gang would be probably one of the worst decisions you could possibly make.
Because then you have some friends, but you immediately have enemies too.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Okay. That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And now you're being held to certain standards that you may not agree with. You're starting to give up your own individualized sense of morality for the group morality, and that becomes a danger, not just physically, but on a mental level as well.
Is the food really bad?
Yeah. It's it's I guess not as bad as what you might think it might be. Again, I am a fan of pretty much every food here on the outside. I don't think there's really anything I don't like very much, but there is definitely stuff, and mainly it was bad for the texture. Is if you had some decent cooks working in the kitchen who actually cared about the people that they're serving, you probably would end up with some better meals. But you might get a cookie that's rock hard one day, and then it's just completely doughy the next day. Whereas if there was some consistency with the bakers or whatever it was, then you might have some better tasting meals. But the texture, for the most part, was the biggest problem, rather than the mere taste of the food.
Are they able to cater to any kind of special diet at all?
Yes, they do. Kosher, they would always call kosher early, and I believe, pretty much any sort of dietary plan that you have. Religious diets, they'll cater to. If you have any allergies, they'll change that. But yeah, for the most part, if you're a normal person without a diet restriction, you're going to be eating with everybody else. You don't have an option really.
What everybody else
to do anything else. Yep.
How long were you in?
It ended up being, they have a thing called gain time, where if you behave in prison, then they take a certain percentage off your sentence, but you get maxed out at a certain point. So you have to serve in Florida at least 85% of your time. And I obviously got all my game time. I didn't get in trouble at all. I was in there. And so I ended up serving 85% of 21 months, which equated to about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yep. But I was lucky enough to get placed into some different programs, community programs for being lower custody for the majority of my sentence. I started out in the reception center, which is max security because everyone gets transferred through there. And so I learned a lot of what it was like to be in a max security prison from the get-go. But once I was always community custody, really. And so I got to move into a place where I could work for a little bit, and then a place where I was sort of in like a drug rehab facility for a little while too.
So you were in Florida in prison, at various prisons, but always in Florida, and your family for the most part is in Ohio. Were they able to visit you every once in a while, or how often did that happen?
Yeah, and this goes back in again to how much I appreciate my parents and my family. But I don't know, I'd want to say my mom came down to visit me 7 times or so. My dad came down pretty close to that. My aunts and uncles came down. My grandparents came down many times. My brothers and sister came down several times. I had probably 14 or 15 friends from home come down and fly and see me. My girlfriend came down quite a few times. I was pretty busy for the most part.
So this is a whole different aspect here, your girlfriend. How did she react to the news? Or did she know you were going to do this? Did you tell her ahead of time?
This is the interesting part of the entire thing as well, is I didn't actually know her while I was doing any of this. I probably would not have done this if I'd had somebody else that I was risking their life with as well. And I met her while I was out on bond at a music festival called Bonnaroo. We just happened to stumble upon each other in the woods and hit it off from there and maintained contact the entire time, saw each other before I went into prison. And we didn't originally plan on it being anything while I was in there because, we couldn't connect physically. And so we kind of maintained just our connection. And it got to the point as we continued through the process and we were writing letters back and forth and calling whenever I could in certain locations, calling every day. Her coming down and seeing me, we recognized that even without the physical aspect, that we clicked so well on a mental level that it was worth kind of just waiting until I got out to see what would happen. And whenever I got out, it's been as good as what we imagined it to be. And we've been, we've been extremely tight since. It's been nothing but good, which is kind of counterintuitive thinking about a long distance relationship, especially with somebody in prison. And I don't know, I understand from an outside perspective how foolish that seemed at the time, but it's been nothing but great for me and her.
That's interesting. If you guys end up getting married or spend the rest of your life together, chances are you've already gone through the worst part of it, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of relationships, you get so quickly into it physically that it's a mask to the things you don't like about the person mentally. And so we were able to get that out of the way so that when we ever did be able to reconnect, that it's been great from there.
What's the funniest or maybe better phrase, the most unusual thing you saw happen or while you were in prison?
That's a hard question. It seems like I was always seeing funny things.
Well, you don't have to limit it to just one story either.
Oh, I know. It seemed like all the time I was saying funny things because of the sheer stupidity that existed within there. And I'd always told some of my, the guys that I would talk to that, if there was a comedian from the outside who could just spend 1 week in prison, he'd have material for the rest of his life. But to think back on any individual circumstances is harder. I guess there was one time that I was in an argument with some of the different prisoners about how they were saying these rats were roaming around the outside of the kitchen and they were huge and they were probably showing something about the size of a loaf of bread. I'm like, there's no way there's a rat that's that big, just its body. And so we got in an argument for a while, but eventually one time one of them comes running out and a guard inside screams and he's like, I told you there was rats that big. And I was like, I got to see this. I go in there and there's a possum wandering around on the inside.
You didn't know it was not a rat?
Yeah, exactly. They believed that the possum was the rat.
Wow. Well, they kind of look like rats, sort of.
Yeah, they do. But I don't know. It's just, there was all sorts of little funny stuff like that would happen all the time, but there's nothing. And again, it has to do, I think you bond humor level, or you bond um your senses of humor match with people that you're intellectually similar to. And so to be in somewhere where there wasn't like, not that there was dumb people in there all the time, but that like I just didn't find people that were from my walk of life or that like had my education. And so it was harder for me to find somebody to bond with on a humor level. And so I felt like I did a lot of time not laughing while I was in there.
Okay.
But
Are there good people in prison?
of course, yeah. There's not many innocent people as far as the law goes, but there are a lot of good people. I don't think that I think there's a difference between morality and law. And law is sort of an attempt to match the morality of the society at the time. And at one point in time, plenty of things that were unlawful were moral. For example, I mean, slavery was lawful, but it was immoral. The right for women to vote was unlawful, but it's moral. And so I don't think that those things necessarily match. It's just the attempt of the society to be able to match them. And so I think morality, we oftentimes will say for the people, we match that or make that synonymous to good. And so I think there's a lot of guys in there, for example, that are not like morally incompetent people, but end up in prison because they chose to do something that like was considered unlawful at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs being a big one of those. But obviously there's different individual ones. There's a lot of people, especially like some of the really good people I saw in there were in there for DUI accidents. And it's not like that person set out to do harm. I recognize that we have to have a system that punishes somebody based on the consequences rather than the motives, at least to some degree. And so like there needs to be some reconciliation for what they did, but it's unfortunate that some of these guys can set out with the idea is like, oh, I'm just going to go have a good night with my buddy and end up serving 10 years or more. So there's lots of good people in there who made mistakes. There's a lot of evil people in there too.
Yes, I would assume so.
Yeah.
What if this whole thing had been successful? You know, that would have paid off. What was your total student loan amount?
It is around 130,000.
Okay.
It's down now from there because I've been working and I worked some before, and my parents have been working with it while I was in prison and I'm paying them back. But It was 130.
And what did you expect to net from this venture?
Around 50,000.
Okay. So you would have still had, you know, you had knocked off a little more than a third of it. Would you have done it again if this had worked?
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I know that everybody is thinking, of course, and that's a possibility. But
what I'm thinking is if you were that confident before you did it the first time, you know, doing it successfully, that just added to your confidence, saying, "Hey, I can do this."
Right. I guess my evidence comes from some of the past scenarios in which I did do something illegal, and I can't get into exactly like why I did or what I did, but I have done stuff in the past that was successful. And for whatever reason, like I do things merely for the experience of it. I can do it. And even if it made me money and it was successful, I didn't continue to exacerbate that mode of gaining like money. I just did it because I wanted to see that I could do it. I wanted to like know that I was capable. And then I moved on from that. And there's actually it's not even just a one-time occurrence that I'm thinking back in my memory. It's like many different times that I've attempted stuff, sort of conquered it in my own life and then moved on from it.
So you're the type,
and so
it sounds like you'd be the type of person that you could go into a casino and wager a big amount and win a huge amount and then say, okay, I'm ahead. Let's just leave.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Of course. And in fact, I actually move on beyond there, and I don't like gambling at all because it feels like an insult to my own intelligence to be able to like go in and pull a machine that I know the odds are against me and I still keep putting money into it. I guess I do, but I'd be able to go in with some friends and like just take in a set amount of money, but would kill me throughout the entire time. And I think that it would still bug me, honestly, even if I won money. So, but yeah, definitely.
Okay. How is it? What's been your experience now that you're out and you're working to be able to find work with a felony conviction on your record?
Yeah. As of now, I mean, I found a job in the oil industry, but it's not an engineering job. And I think it's very easy for a person who has a felony to use that as, I'm not saying that that the felony doesn't hinder them at all, because it does, but I think it's very easy for us to use it as sort of an excuse to not get a certain position or get a job or become this person. In general, people like giving each other second chances. And I think that sometimes we can say, I didn't get this job because I have a felony, and that's the only reason why. We use it as an excuse or a psychological barrier from fulfilling our potential. So I haven't been able to get an engineering job yet, but I am hesitant to say that that's because of my felony just yet.
Okay.
I'm still trying, though.
Has anyone else in your family been to prison?
No, actually, none of them have even been to jail. I live in a very tight-knit community. I think I maybe have know one or two friends that I've had school with in distant ways that have gone to jail even, but I haven't known really anybody to go to prison, and certainly not in my family.
Have you gotten any kind of feeling that you're kind of the black sheep now? Or it sounds like it doesn't, like they've accepted what you did and you're moving on.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, exactly. It's something that I know that people have in the back of their heads, but it's not like they ever treat me different. They are curious about it, and they're understanding sort of why I did it. And they know me sort of on a deeper level, and know that just because I did something, I might have done something bad, but it doesn't make me a bad person. And my family has watched me, an extended family has watched me grow up, and they know who I am as a person, and know that I guess my heart's in the right place, even though my mind can get a little bit ahead of myself, I guess.
That's good. That's a way to look at it. It's like, what you did isn't necessarily who you are,
Yes, exactly. In psychology, that's called the fundamental attribution error. It's basically saying that if somebody does something clumsy, it doesn't that it makes them a clumsy person. That's not necessarily true. It just, circumstances can determine certain things, and it doesn't necessarily constitute that person as a whole.
Yeah, we all make mistakes. Some
Right.
just on a more grand scale than others, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So what's your long-term plan now, or what do you see moving ahead now?
Yeah. I guess I am going to start by just working and working and working. I work probably 14 to 16 hours a day, depending on where the location is, and am working 7 days a week, and usually for about a month straight or more at a time. And so that, although it's taking up my entire life, it's still a step in the right direction. And I'm basically making my money off of the amount of time that I'm working. And so giving up this portion of my life, at least to catch myself up, to help pay my parents back and get started on my student loans, is all it's what's happening immediately. But at the same time, I am not looking for an engineering job. I'm still looking to try and use my education to get myself into a place where I don't have to work so hard. But the goal is to be able to free myself of these student loans. And once I do that, the world kind of opens up again. Not in the illegal side of it, where I feel like I had my fair share of it, but in the legal aspects, in which there's no limit on the amount of things that you can try and do in your entire life, and there's no finite amount of experiences to have. And so I guess I kind of want to understand them all. I just kind of want to piece the world together.
I would love to check back with you in a year or maybe 5 years and see where you're at. That would be, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean that would be fun. I'm always down. I don't even know where, I look back a year from now, and I mean, I guess I was sitting in prison at that point in time, but 2 years from that point, it seems like a year at a time, you never really know where I'm going to end up or what I'm going to be doing. But one thing I am sure of is that I constantly push myself into uncomfortable environments, And where that leads me, who knows?
Did anything good come out of this whole experience?
Oh yeah, boundless good. And that again, you thrive where you get out of your comfort zone. You begin to see what life is really like, or the value in being human when those emotions are flowing at their most, or where those experiences are once in a lifetime. And so I got, for that reason, to see aspects of humanity that I didn't get to see. I got to learn new things about the world that I didn't know before. I got to understand pain in a more intimate level than I had ever done in the past. And also the joy of getting out and of seeing the people in my life that care about me and all that. So even when it seems like a completely negative experience, there's still positive if you can see it. I guess that's a byproduct of being sort of an optimist as I am. But I think to see this as an entirely negative circumstance would be completely ignoring all the really good things that did come out.
Then it would just be a waste of a year or two of your life.
Exactly.
Luke, if someone wants to contact you or has more questions for you or anything, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I think you have my email, and you can always provide that to them if they want it.
What I'll do is in the show notes for this episode, I'll put that in there. So if they want to go and look at the show notes for this episode, then they can contact you by email.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right.
I'm always checking it, and so I'll be in touch shortly after if they do email me.
Good. All right. Well, Luke, It's been really interesting to talk to you about this and hear this story. And what I really like is the fact that obviously this one decision, you're not a career criminal. It's one bad decision, and now you're obviously back on the right track and heading the right direction. So it's really good to see.
Trying to. Yeah, I appreciate that, Scott.
Your podcast episode went live back in the summer of 2018, so it's been more than 5 years ago. I'm guessing you've had some things happen in your life since then. In fact, I just discovered recently that in that episode, I actually said, hey, I'd like to check back with you in 1 to 5 years and see where you're at. And here we are. So what's been going on with you?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that 5 years has passed since our last conversation. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but
yeah,
time goes by fast, I guess. The last 5 years, a lot. I think the last time that we had any discussions, I had just recently got out of prison, and I was probably working in the oil field potentially at the time, or just starting to.
Yeah, you were. I think, as I recall, you were working like 7 days a week at that time, but it wasn't an engineering job like what you were looking for.
Correct. So basically, whenever I got out, I knew that I probably wanted to get my foot back in the door in the oil field because my degree was in petroleum engineering and I didn't really want to waste that. And so I started applying for different jobs. And while I was applying for engineering jobs, I was also just like, hey, I'm just going to go work for an oil company, get some experience on the ground. And so I was working 2 different jobs, but both were kind of as rig hands, basically lower level guy on the actual drilling pad or the snubbing pad. The first one was as a floor hand for a drilling company, and I think I worked with them for maybe 6 months to a year. The other one was called a snubbing company, or working on a snubbing unit as like a production. Like they go back in and they drill out different plugs in the oil well, and so I worked for them for maybe another 6 months or so. At that point in time, I had been continued applying to engineering jobs, and I had gotten turned down for several after a background check. That was the period of time when I was kind of working, trying to get back into the oil field. During that time, Lauren, who was the girl that I had met at Bonnaroo before I went into prison, she and I moved to Chicago, and she and I rekindled the relationship, and we basically continued to start dating at that point in time. She was finishing up her master's in social work in Chicago, and I was working in the oil field at the time, and we both just decided that once she graduated, we were going to try and get out of the cold climate, and I was going to try and get out of actually working on the rigs. And so we left Chicago and went on a big road trip for about 4 months around the States and drove up to Maine, down to Florida, across to California, up to nearly Oregon. And then at the end of it, we decided that we liked Austin, Texas the best. So we moved here.
Wow, that's a way to check out every place to live and then decide where you want to go, I guess.
Yeah, we just made a pros and cons list of every major city. We had originally thought that we were probably going to be shooting towards San Diego, but then when we got there, the cost of living and more so, we weren't pushed away from San Diego as we were drawn towards different cities.
Texas seems like it would be in line with your career goals, being in oil.
Yep.
Is it also in line with Lauren's and what she wants to do?
Well, we both ended up kind of taking entirely different paths when it was all said and done from what our degrees were in. Lauren worked as a psychotherapist for a period of time, and she eventually just kind of got burnt out by it. I think that she was working with people who were not as well off, and it was harder, I think, for her to relate with translating some of the values that she had been raised with and the tools that she had learned throughout college to be able to actually have a definitive impact in a lot of these people's lives. And I think that just the mental burden of talking to people and listening to their struggles every single day, and I don't know, maybe not necessarily feeling like she was having a really definitive impact in everyone's lives, I think that it just eventually wore on her. So she stepped away from psychotherapy. I basically, when I got to Austin, I had started looking for jobs in the petroleum engineering sector, kind of in the city of Austin, because I was pretty much done with working a month away at a time. It wasn't really conducive to a healthy relationship, and also I just didn't like it very much. So I had been looking for engineering jobs in Austin, didn't find anything right away. So I picked up a job for a remodeling company, and that company, I worked for them for maybe 3 or 4 months. And I was basically, in my mind, I was like, well, I could probably do this too myself. So I broke off from that company and started my own like handyman business. And I've slowly grown that over the course of 3 years. And now I have a remodeling company and I have 2 employees working for me. And we are basically just get hired out by clients to renovate their old homes. And yeah, that's kind of what we're doing at the moment.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Why does it not surprise me that you decided to own your own business? That just seems seems like a natural.
Yeah, I guess whenever you transition your risky behavior out of illegal stuff, probably the only good way is legal outlets, while still getting that, like, I don't know, stimulation.
Have you been back to Panama?
I have not been back to Panama, but I have been doing some traveling. I went down, Lauren and I traveled to Ecuador and Colombia and did about a month traveling around there. I haven't been back to Central America, period, mainly because I've just been trying to get, like, I'm between running a business and establishing myself in a new city and relationship stuff. Like, I mean, Lauren and I actually just got married 3 weeks ago now.
Oh man, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, life's just been really, really busy.
But all good stuff though.
Yeah, all good stuff. And then for our honeymoon, we're going to go back Southeast Asia for a couple of months. So we should be doing that in the spring of this upcoming year.
The big question I'm wondering about, and maybe some of the listeners are as well, are your student loans paid off now?
They actually are not fully paid off, but they are fairly well paid off. I'd say 50% of them are paid off. At some point in time, I was feeling kind of down about how things were going as well. Like, I wasn't getting a job in the engineering sector again. I was working for a modeling company and I wasn't making like great money. But at some point in my time, and with the advice of some good mentors in my life, they're like, you need to stop thinking about the debt and start more thinking about how you can offset the debt by increasing your income. Because if I was just throwing all my money potentially at this debt, then I would have no money to kind of start up another things. And as I kind of repositioned my mindset, I started being like, okay, well, I'm going to focus on starting my own business. I'm going to start increasing my income. And quite rapidly, I started to increase my income. So I was able to then throw some extra money towards my debt, but also a good portion of the extra profits that I'm making, I'm reinvesting into my business. So we purchased our first home, which end goal is going to end up being a rental property and an investment property. So some of our extra income is going towards, instead of paying down the 8% negative interest that would be my debt, it's more so going into the investment that I believe I can be making more than an 8% increase by investing in my home. So yes, I've paid down my debt some, but I've kind of positioned the way that I thought about the debt, and I'm focusing more on growing my business and continuing to raise my total income and investing in an asset that I believe will be end up making more money than if I'd have just taken that money and thrown it towards the student loans.
Right. Yeah, I think that's smart. You're doing it deliberately. You figured it out, and you're not just reacting and trying to get by day to day. You've got a plan. That's important.
All right.
From what I've heard, student loans are one of the most difficult things to get paid off because the way they've structured the interest. You hear about somebody that says my loan was $50,000. I've been paying the minimum payments on it for 5 years, and now it's $80,000.
Right.
You just don't make any headway very quickly with it.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a pretty high risk loan, and if the interest rate matches that, like, I don't believe that any private entity would give out a loan to somebody who basically has zero credit history. I don't think that it's entirely predatory, but I think the law that allowed people to just take out ridiculous amounts of money was made in good intention. They're like, we want to be able to give access to education to loads and loads of people. But what it ended up being, because the interest rate is high, I feel like it can kind of be predatory in the way that the government doesn't really have the risk of you defaulting, because at the end of the day, they're going to be able to garnish your wages. They're going to be able to recover that in some way over the course of your lifetime. And so they don't hold the same amount of risk that maybe a bank might hold. And so I don't think a bank would be willing to give out somebody with no credit history, with no income, with no real work experience, a loan of over $100,000, 6 figures, without the ability to be actually able to recuperate if they decided to default.
And to give a loan like that to an 18-year-old that has no financial experience and is currently not even working seems pretty irresponsible to me.
Yeah.
It's been 5 years since we last spoke. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
I would really like to have several investment properties. I think on the path that I'm currently at, I am getting more into development, like specifically infill development, so basically like properties that already have a building on it, either grabbing that building, renovating it, and building another unit on it, or subdividing the land and like doing something like that. So I'm really hoping that in another 5 years, I'll get to the point where that's kind of my full-time job rather than acting as a general contractor. I will be more so looking at different properties that I can purchase and renovate and potentially rent out.
Are you talking residential or commercial?
Residential.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess kind of the end goal is for me to be able to have some sort of passive income. I mean, I know that that's the goal of pretty much everybody in life at this point, but I feel like the real estate and with the skills that I'm currently developing in construction, that hopefully I can be able to at least have a few rental properties. I'm not really looking to become a property manager at the end of the time, but I would love in another 5 years to have a few properties that I can rent out and create like a steady stream of income for myself.
Yeah, you can have investment properties and have somebody else manage it for you.
Yeah, right.
That pretty much is passive income right there.
Yeah. It's a realistic way of achieving passive income. That, and also I am extremely grateful for the relationships that I have. I hope that I can continue to be able to foster those relationships, that my marriage continues to stay strong, that I'm able to do a bunch of traveling. I still love traveling. And the whole point of living for me to some degree is just growing. So hopefully I can learn a little bit more about the world and understand things a little bit better and continue to maintain my levels of happiness.
If you happen to live in or around the Austin, Texas area and need some remodeling, Luke's company is Himes Remodeling and Renovation. I'll have the phone number and a link to the website in the episode notes at whatwasthatlike.com/164. And also in the episode notes, you can see a picture of Luke and Lauren and their dog, Rhea. Just as a quick refresher, we typically do one flashback episode each month. For 5.5 years, we've had a new original episode every other Friday, and that has not changed. The flashback episode always comes on a Friday in between those new episodes. And the idea really came about as a suggestion from listeners. People would ask me, what about this person you had on the show a long time ago? What are they doing now? And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's hear from those people. And I'm always open to new ideas for the show, so if you think of something, let me know. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. And now, the listener story for this episode. If you've been thinking about sending in a listener story of your own, now's the time. Record it on your phone, like 5 to 10 minutes, and email it to me so we can all hear it. Scott@whatwasthatlike.com. This listener talks about being robbed while at work, but she wasn't really at work. Stay safe, and I'll see you back here in a week with a brand new story.
I just really love your podcast, and apparently I would like to be on it because I'm sending in a listener story. When I was a teenager, I had a friend who worked at a convenience store, and they kind of took advantage of her because she's always willing to work. And she sometimes worked open to close, which was like 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. for, consecutive days. One day we decided to go to my boyfriend's cottage. And so then we came back and we partied a lot and we didn't sleep very much. So she was really exhausted. And I said, well, I can go in to work for you. Her boss knew me because I was always there. She was my best friend, and I used to hang out there and keep her company and help her stock the shelves, and I usually did the cash and all that stuff too. So it was kind of like she was getting paid and I was hanging out. Anyways, I told her that I would do it. She said, great. She gave me a quick rundown on the store closing procedures because I didn't always pay attention to what she was doing by then because that was, kind of late and I just wanted to get out of there. So anyways, she gave me the key to lock up and off I went. Somewhere around 11:30 or so, 2 men came into the store and they were wearing stockings over their faces. And normally you would think that somebody would be scared seeing that, but just looking at their statures, I knew it was my boyfriend and her boyfriend, and that they were probably just coming to scare me as a joke because I didn't really work there. So anyways, I didn't really think too much of it, but they yelled at me to give them all the cash in the register. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll just get right on that. I'll give you all the cash in the register, no problem. And then all of a sudden, one of them stuck a gun in my face, and I realized that my original assessment was not accurate, and this was not my boyfriend or her boyfriend. I've never seen a gun in person because I live in Ottawa, Canada, and back in the 80s, that just was not a big thing. It wasn't mainstream for people to be walking around with guns. So neither my boyfriend or her boyfriend, I knew neither of them had guns, so I knew this couldn't have been them. So they took me into the back room to steal cartons of cigarettes from the tobacco cage, but I didn't have a key because I didn't work there. So I told him that, and he said I was lying. So I told him the story about, how I didn't work there, and my friend was hungover, so I offered to work for her and all this. And then I said, I don't have keys. I have a key for the front door, but I don't have a key for the tobacco cage or the time lock safe or anything. So I'm really kind of useless. So after a couple of minutes, they realized that I really was useless. So they just left me in the back in where the tobacco cage was. And they went out and they opened up the cash register. Somehow they figured it out. I actually think it was probably somebody that worked there at one time or at a retail store that knew how to open the cash register. But anyways, so they did that. They grabbed all the cash and then they took as many packs and cartons of cigarettes as they could before they took off. I was kind of stunned. So I called my friend and she was still dead to the world. So I called Ray because his number was posted on the cash register because he was the store manager. And I told him what happened and he was so confused about why I was there working and why my friend was not. And anyways, he just said he'd be there shortly and to call the police. So I was in a real sketchy neighborhood. So the police came pretty quickly anyways. And they seemed like they really didn't believe my story. And they were kind of rude to me about it all. In retrospect, I think it's because I wasn't freaking out too much. I guess I was more in shock than anything. I think maybe they were figuring, I'm young. I'm only 16, 17. So if this really happened, I should be a little more panicked, but I wasn't. They asked me to describe the gun, and I really couldn't say too much about it other than it was black and it was a handgun. Apparently, tossing weapons onto buildings was a real popular thing to do back in the late 80s because one of the cops used the emergency stairs. There was a set of metal stairs going up to the top of the building. It was not a very tall building. One of the cops went up there and he came back down with a gun in his hand. And so he asked me to look at it and let him know if that was it. And So I was like, yeah, I guess so. And I was happy that they'd found it because it validated my account of the events. But surprisingly, they both started laughing at me, which I wasn't very happy with. And they asked me how I couldn't tell that it was a starter's pistol. And I had no idea what the hell a starter pistol was. Then my fear turned to anger and embarrassment. And I said, because I don't live in this shitty fucking neighborhood. That's why. I honestly don't remember anything more about that night other than Ray letting me go home and not letting me finish my shift. But yeah, it was not fun. It was like, I still remember. I don't remember it like I wasn't terrified. I don't know why I wasn't terrified, but it's definitely something that's still stuck in my mind all these years later. Like, I'm 55 years old and this happened, like I said, when I was 16 or 17, and it's still like it was yesterday. Thanks for listening. Again, I enjoy your show. Keep it up and I'll keep on listening.